Welcome to the 14 Wins podcast, where we talk about UFOs and all of its related high strangeness. I go by Bones, and with us is the notorious Ramex.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Ram. Here we are at it again. We are going to cover the occult again, right? Correct?
Yeah, we're going to dive into a little bit more of the occult. And then, of course, we have to talk about all of the million things happening.
There's so much going on.
There might be one or two things happening.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about the egg yet.
The egg, right.
And I think we'll weave that into some of our discussions around the occult. Because there's an overlap right there. You could say it's basically being proven in front of our eyes. If Jake Barber can prove it, on camera.
Yeah.
That there is a connection between consciousness and these UAP objects.
And for those, should we tell? For those who don't know, it's fairly recent, right? It came out maybe 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago on News Nation.
Right. Yeah. News Nation aired a special, an hour-long special that started it all with Jake Barber, who made some claims that he had been part of a UFO crash retrieval team. He had some videos of a UFO that he's been posting since, or pictures from it since. But the video that was aired by News Nation that showed a crash retrieval, allegedly, was not from Jake Barber.
Oh, okay.
That was from an anonymous person that they said that they validated, and they can't come out with a name. But that's not Jake Barber's video.
Oh, okay. I just assumed it was because he was a helicopter pilot for the Air Force.
Right.
And this footage is basically a helicopter dropping off an egg-shaped UFO, we'll call it.
Yeah, he was a helicopter pilot for a defense contractor or defense contractors. He was an operator, private operator. And that makes a lot of this hard to validate because there wouldn't be government records of a lot of it. He's willing to bring his team forth and attempt to summon a UFO. So we should be able to see that happen on camera. My guess is it happens because we've been talking about this for years.
Right.
And if we look at the occult a little bit differently, I'll dive in the occult. We'll come back to all the UFO stuff. But since we've introduced it, we won't stop ourselves from weaving it into today's discussion.
Okay.
If we start there and I say, well, I'd like to approach the occult the same way that we approach UFO and UAP knowledge, which is we have to layer it in. And that's interesting because UFO and occult knowledge ends up being occulted in the same way. The information is layered in. Some people are aware that UFOs are real. Some people are aware that they appear as orbs. Some people it ends up becoming a whole series of gates that you go through, similar to the way the occult works. And I'd say that's a massive overlap. I don't think that's just a coincidence. And in the last episode, we talked about the occult in a more general sense. And I made some very sweeping generalizations. It was pretty funny to watch the subscriber count go up and down wildly. But we're not going to apologize for any of that.
Yeah, it's a sensitive subject, right? You said that, some people get offended by speaking of the occult related to just religion too. Right?
That's right. It is religious in some ways. In most ways, most of the occult is religious. I did say that there is a small segment of the occult that could be considered a-religious, but it really involves religion, and we have to look at the occult as a part of religion, or in some ways that's one perceptive filter that we could apply that would be accurate.
Right.
But another one that we could apply, and we're going to layer in, is that it is a conscious altering technology. And when we do that, as 14 Wins guys, we automatically go, all right, it fits.
Right.
It fits in, right? It fits in with everything. And then there's a massive overlap. And it fits in exactly with what Jake Barber is talking about. And he would not be the first one to summon a UFO on camera, on command, in front of everyone, right?
Right. So yeah, I immediately think of a person named the Prophet Yahweh, I believe, and that was like in 2005, about 20 years ago. He was with local news and he summoned an orb.
Yeah, that clip is amazing. We'll post it along with this episode, and the news camera picked it up, and the news reporter is pretty much awestruck, and
Yeah.
The news crew chose the date, time, location, all that, and he's just like, I'll try. And sure enough. And he's done it many times since. He hasn't gone anywhere. He lives in Las Vegas, and he's been summoning these orbs now for 20 years.
Yeah. And it looks like, from the video, it looks like the orbs that are now being recorded in New Jersey and other places.
Right.
So, yeah.
So this guy's been out there doing this for 20 years. And is it really going to prove it to somebody if Jake Barber does it? You know, there's just going to be a lot more questions. And when Prophet Yahweh does it, they were like, oh, it's a balloon and someone's releasing the balloon. But then he would have had to have controlled the balloon with his mind.
Yeah.
And if it was a balloon on a tether, you would see it going up.
Right.
But instead you see it appearing and disappearing. And there's no reason to believe that it's anything other than what it appears to be.
Right.
Because Prophet Yahweh wouldn't be the only one who's done this. Chris Bledsoe has now done it on camera. And there's been a lot of people who've made the claim that CE5. Stephen Greer's gotten some interesting videos from those CE5 events. And I've said this before. I don't think much of Stephen Greer, but I do think CE5 is real. And I do think he may have had contact.
It's one of those things, you know, when we talk about the phenomenon, it's like if we do have good footage and good evidence, it seems to it gets less attention than something that isn't that good and kind of easily debunked. You know what I mean? It's just strange how it's flip-flop like that.
Right. The better the footage, the more intense the skepticism.
Right.
And we could say that that's a good thing, because we talked about Schopenhauer's stages of truth before, where it's like first the truth is ridiculed and then it's attacked. Sure. Finally, it's seen as inevitable. So the intense skepticism and the intense attacks against Jake Barber make it look like it's getting close to inevitable.
Right.
And the thing, we don't know if Jake Barber is legit or valid or not yet, for sure. We do know that he's been in the military. We know that he worked where he said he worked, but that's it.
Right.
The world of defense contractors gets very gray. For now, we're just going to have to wait and see. And I think that is the logical approach with Jake Barber. There's this social media war that's erupted around whether or not people believe Jake Barber or not. Why would you? And why do you have to? I don't think Jake Barber is requiring anyone to believe him without any validation. So he's offering to take John Kozlowski. He's the new director of AARO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And the steps that he's taken may be in the right direction, but the first hearing with Gillibrand was really bad. But if he's willing to go out there and do this publicly with Skywatchers and Jake Barber, that's great.
Yeah.
I hope they film it. I hope we can all see it. I hope they bring instruments to monitor the electromagnetic field, the thermal, all of it, so that we can just get it all done at once. But there will still be attacks. There will still be questions. Jake Barber somehow flew in a magical drone that involves a new reactor. You know, but there's no consensus framework for whether or not UFOs are real.
Right.
There's no point where everyone goes, okay, once you do this, we'll all accept that UFOs are real. For many years, it's been UFO videos. We don't have the right videos. People were all up Lou Elizondo's butt because he didn't provide them with videos that he kept talking about. There are hours of videos going up on YouTube right now, compilations of just the last few months of UFOs. Right. It's not good video. Prophet Yahweh did this on camera 20 years ago. You could clearly see the tic-tac. It moves around in the sky just like tic-tacs do. It didn't change anything.
Right.
The fact that UFOs lack a consensus framework and the fact that the occult lacks a consensus framework for whether or not it works or is real, I would say is also something that appears to me to be more than coincidental. On the last episode, we talked about how we thought Crowley was more of a showman, which I do. But then if we look at the occult a little differently, if we say, okay, he wasn't actually trying to summon a dragon or doing some of the other stuff that he said that his little cult followers said that he did. If we said, okay, he was engaging in some sort of conscious altering technology, and that technology allowed him to communicate with an entity. And we know that there are people today that have been validated that are saying, I can talk to an entity and get it to make a UFO appear. I can talk to an entity and tell you what's in an envelope. Things like that.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting guy named Don Phillips who is on Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix. And Don is in touch with an entity all the time. The entity's name is Becky. I think it's called My Paranormal Partner. It's a great episode. I wish people would check it out, because you're going to understand that there are people who are talking to some form of non-local consciousness all the time. And we call them mediums, and that gets involved in the occult.
Okay.
But then there's also tools of the occult, which we can get into in a minute. But let's go back to Crowley for a second, because I think we can even tie this into Stephen Greer and the whole UFO thing that's going on. Because Crowley claimed to be in touch with a being named Lamb. And the most interesting thing about Crowley's story is the picture that he drew of Lamb looks insanely like the same image that was on the front of Whitley Strieber's book Communion. And Whitley Strieber's book Communion broke the alien abduction world apart. And people who saw Whitley Strieber's book cover had a visceral, physical reaction to it in some cases. And many, many people reached out to him. Thousands of letters came in and said, I've seen this thing. So it's very interesting that Crowley drew a description of a being that looked very similar.
And then this is a look that's kind of emblematic of what we call the Greys, right? Or is it was a little different?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The almond-shaped eyes, sort of a triangular head, same type of pallor of skin. And so I think those stories are pretty interesting, and they sound a little bit more like high strangeness. So if Crowley was being honest about something, I think that's what he was being honest about. And then Stephen Greer posted an image, or someone posted an image from a Stephen Greer CE5 event, which had an entity above the crowd that was doing the meditation. And the entity looked an awful lot like Lamb.
Yeah, that's wild.
Which makes one wonder, were Aleister Crowley and Stephen Greer in touch with the same entity? And then we'd look at Crowley and have to go, well, who was Crowley? And we'd look at Greer and go, who was Greer? But that would be grasping at straws. But it's interesting nonetheless. And this is how things often are in the occult. It's very gray. And practitioners say that that's intentional, that it allows for the occult to stay hidden. And if nobody's really sure if it works, it allows you to continue to make it work.
Right. Oh, so one of the things talking about Jake Barber is that he's going to have more episodes on, and they showed us a really short clip of a remote viewer, right? Like with a blindfold, like wearing a blindfold or something.
Right. So that's sensory deprivation. And those techniques.
Okay, yeah, right.
Those are techniques that we could even find in the occult. We can find them in the Gateway Experience, and I would encourage people to look that up. I think we've talked about it before, and we're going to talk about it again. It's called the Gateway Experience in the Monroe Institute, and it's all over this consciousness topic. Robert Monroe was a brilliant man who was also a consciousness explorer and kind of popularized or founded, if you will, binaural beats.
Oh, yeah.
His program, HemiSync, which is like Hemisphere Sync, is trying to synchronize the two halves of your brain, like left brain, like right brain sort of thing.
Okay.
So it works like binaural beats. And one could say that that's very similar to the occult too. It also involves chanting. The gateway experience has, at the beginning of the meditation, involves chanting. It involves cleansing. It involves casting a protective shield around you that brings in only love and only allows good entities, positive entities that are of a higher frequency, and is supposed to keep lower entities and lower frequency beings out. So all of those things sound identical. Those are the occult. It's just taking the occult and making it a little bit more scientific and focusing it entirely on consciousness.
Right.
It removes religion. And when you're talking to these entities, you could be talking to whatever entity is involved in your religion. So if we removed what the gateway experience is from the occult, and we know that it works, given the Prophet Yahweh, given Chris Bledsoe, I think Jake Barber's going to pull it off, and we know that it works, then that 1,000,000% proves the overlap between UFOs and the occult. Now, why is that important? Because that means that our ancestors have been having contact with this for thousands of years.
Right.
It also means that they may have developed technologies based on some of these ideas that we are completely unaware of. We still don't know how the pyramids were built with Bronze Age tools, right? Things like that. You could ancient aliens the heck out of this thing. But in Graham Hancock's work in ancient civilizations, but that appears to have been, there was some method of building these things that was completely forgotten.
So I remember you last time talking about how, the occult doesn't actually mean that it's evil, but, we do know that there are occult groups that may use it for evil purposes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a good start. I mean, we should layer in some of that. So there's black magic. There's a very real history of black magic and dark magic and destructive magic. And I should also mention that there's a belief among some people who are religious or some people who aren't even religious that the occult is destructive by nature, and the search for power beyond you will end up destroying you. Christopher Lee was a really interesting character. That was, that guy who played Saruman in the Lord of the Rings movies.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He was rumored to have thousands of occult texts. At one point, this guy asks him, "Oh, do you have thousands of occult texts? What's that all about?" And he says, "Well, I don't have thousands of occult texts. First of all," he said, I have like 5. And he says, if you get mixed up in this, you'll not only lose your mind, you'll lose your soul.
Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's a good example of someone who was like, don't get mixed up in it at all. But then he started pointing specifically to diabolical stuff, to some of the, specifically to some of the more satanic and diabolical occult practices.
Right.
And there is a history of that, but that history doesn't start, specifically satanic history, doesn't really start until around 1000 AD.
Okay.
And that really starts when a couple of priests are just accused of witchcraft. And then there's 1,000 more years, you could argue that it goes into today, of people accusing each other of witchcraft based on some of the fundamentalist views. But it really, Satanism even doesn't start until 1,000, maybe.
Okay.
There's one historical scholar who I think would pin it around 600 AD, but it doesn't even start until then. And then it's really seen as a reaction to Christianity and a reaction to what Christianity becomes. Because back when there's more Gnostic Christianity and Christianity's kind of all over the map, there isn't one focus on, say, Satan or the devil or evil. It's different in different sects. So it kind of doesn't get going until the church really starts dominating.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that would be religious or occult Satanism. There is a group that started in the 1960s here in America that really is just trolling the conservative or Christian ideology. And I don't know why they need to dress up in robes and devil masks to do that, but that's what they do. And they
really?
Yeah, and they claim to be atheists. There is a history of devil-related occult texts and practices. Fairly small. There is a lot of black magic history. If we looked at it that way, it goes back to probably the earliest history of magic, which I think we would pin around Mesopotamia and Sumer. So if you're looking for the devil, it's probably all the way back at the beginning too.
Right.
And then I keep mentioning Peter Levenda's work because it's very interesting, and a couple of things in there that he throws around. One is he titles his book Sinister Forces, and what he alludes to is the idea that there is a sinister force that has been weaving its way through history and is still weaving its way through history now. But it weaves its way through in a more subtle way. And I think this is where people get all mixed up with the occult too. Let me put it this way. If you were summoning an angel and you were doing so in front of a dozen people, and that would be pretty astounding, right? But if you were summoning an angel and you could only see it, and maybe it was even appearing to you in a dream, but it told you where to look for treasure, and you found the treasure. I mean, it's the same, right? Whether it appears as a visible apparition or whether it passes on the information to you, it ends up being the same. And maybe it's only visible in your dream state or in your meditative state, but if it's having a real world effect, then it's the same. It doesn't really matter whether it's visible or not. And that is what I think is happening in a lot of different ways. I don't know if Levenda is right and it's purely one sinister force that he's tracing, but it's a very interesting lens to look at this thing. And I think he's right about the idea that these non-local consciousness and these UAP entities are getting involved in our world, but they're doing so by influencing us, by influencing people, by passing on information. And the occult appears to be a way where you can go out and access that information.
Yeah, and like you said, we don't know how long this has been going on. It's been going on for the entirety of humanity.
And what's helping the occult stay hidden is that everyone's expecting to see a magician say magic words and see a dragon breathe fire on a tree and the tree go up in smoke.
Right.
But if I go to bed and I have a dream about a dragon that's blowing fire on the tree, and then the tree goes up in smoke due to lightning or someone flicking a cigarette on the tree, it's the same thing. The result was the same. The spell worked. The spell had a real effect.
Right.
If you summoned a demon in black magic in order to make somebody ill, and they never saw a demon, but they just got very sick, it would ultimately be the same thing, right?
Right.
So these things are very difficult to prove scientifically, obviously. We would have to prove them through observation, credible observation. So-and-so performed the ritual, and then so-and-so got sick. And I can tell you of one very famous incident where William Butler Yeats and Aleister Crowley were fighting for control over the Order of the Golden Dawn. And Yeats is famously said to have made Crowley very sick, and Crowley backed off. Yeah. Yeah, that was a great story. People should look that one up. If you're interested in some of these tales of the occult, the Battle of Blythe Road between Aleister Crowley and William Butler Yeats, who was an occultist. So many famous occultists. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Benjamin Franklin, Sir Isaac Newton. And then Levenda gets into a bunch of occultists in the 60s and 70s, and he gets in some very interesting connections in between Manson, and he starts tracing some of this evil back to Nazi Germany, or I should say through Nazi Germany. And that would surprise no one. So we should and will do an entire episode on Nazis and the occult and Nazis and UAP, and that information and those stories aren't just sensational and fascinating. They are also extremely relevant to the UAP topic.
Yeah.
But doing that much research into Nazis can make you feel a little nauseous.
Yeah.
So we'll keep it brief this time. I don't think I'd be overstating it by saying that Nazis were an occult empire.
Yeah.
And we know that in World War I, Hitler was writing poetry to pagan gods, which is pretty interesting. Because then you find Jack Parsons, many years later in the desert praying to those pagan gods for rockets. So here you have Hitler praying to these old gods, and then you have Parsons praying to these old gods, and they both moved the world. And L. Ron Hubbard was out there with Parsons, and he founded Scientology. And a lot of those Scientology techniques are based on occult practices, in my opinion. And in my view, the reputed lore of Scientology is very similar to occult lore, where you have thetans instead of archons, which are like demons that are inside of you. And then you have these practices that are getting all of those negative entities out. And this sort of thing works. It even works in therapy. You could recondition some of this stuff too, right? So people get into Scientology, they get into the occult, and they go, oh my gosh, this stuff works. But there are very real psychological reasons and behavioral and societal reasons why some of these occult practices work. And so it's hard to tell at which point anything supernatural was involved or the occult and mind-altering practices themselves just work. And I guess what I'm saying is, back to the whole tree and the dragon analogy, does it really matter? If it affects our world, if you did the ritual and then the ritual affected our world in the way it was intended, then does it really matter? The answer is the occult then works. Yes.
So what are the two sides then? Because you said sometimes it's not supernatural, and to me it sounds almost like it's therapy.
Right. So let's try to game this out a little bit and say, if I am someone who is just on my hands and knees begging for a solution to have a better life, maybe it's a better job, get in shape, but I just can't get motivated. And I start engaging in occult practices that are intended to contact something supernatural. And through that process, I end up cleaning myself up, losing weight through fasting or going on a more vegetarian diet. And that gives me more confidence. I get a better job. And then I go, okay, well, it works. I mean, at what point was it supernatural or not?
Right.
You just can't tell. So, and I guess that's intentional. And what we would say would be supernatural would be if there was no other explanation for the tree catching fire, but it did that night, other than you having that thought. Or if it just comes out of nowhere, it defies complete random probability. And I've said this before. I've said that if magic works, it works by altering probabilities.
Yeah, interesting.
And if we can alter probabilities through our consciousness ourselves, or if entities out there can alter probabilities on our behalf, it sort of doesn't matter. Was it you or the other being that was doing it for you? The question is, did it work? And we can find lots of evidence that the occult works.
It kind of reminds me of telepathy, all the research that goes on with telepathy, because there's really clear evidence in some cases that it is true and it is an absolute thing. And there are other cases where it's very gray. We're not really sure if it works all the time. But there are brain scans. You could do a search and find it that they watch brain activity for certain people who are practicing telepathy, and there's activity.
Yeah, there's activity that proves something is happening there, and that we can tap into something that we're not. And I think some of the tools that are used in the occult are intended to help you tap into that, like tarot and Ouija boards and things like that are intended to help you. Crystal gazing, I mentioned before. These are all things, right, that are intended to help you focus your intent.
Right.
And sigils.
Chanting's another one, right?
Yeah, chanting for sure. That's a great one because that brings up the whole concept of frequency and harmonic resonance. And that's also gets into the whole linking of your brain and hemispheres. So it's about getting in this altered state. And then it's, can you make something happen here? Well, we just said Prophet Yahweh can make orbs appear. Right over his head. We know that for sure. So yeah, if you consider all of that occulted, and Prophet Yahweh, by the way, said he learned to do that by studying the Old Testament in Old Hebrew.
Okay. Interesting. I missed that part.
Yeah.
Huh.
Which reminds me very much of the Joseph Smith story.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So these tools of the occult are intended to focus the user. And then there's things like sigils, which we mentioned before. And those sigils can also be very individual to the practitioner. And they spend a lot of time and they put themselves into the sigil. So the practitioner becomes intertwined with the symbol, and then they can use the symbol in different places. And one other fun little overlap before we switch over to UFOs is that people often point out that these grays or alien beings point a wand-like object at them. Rod.
Yeah.
They usually describe it as a rod because they think that it's an extraterrestrial. But if you were back in, 14th century, you'd go, that's a wand.
Right, a magic wand, right? So we can't have a podcast without talking about all this UFO activity that's been going on. And it's probably the most activity ever recorded in modern times. So where do we start? I mean, all I know so far, I shouldn't say so far, all I know at this point is that the activity started in New Jersey. Everyone knows that. And it's spreading west. Even though there has been some sightings on the West Coast, but it seems like the activity is growing from New Jersey and going to the Midwest now. Still have orbs showing up. It looks like the orbs are actually morphing into the so-called drones with these flashing lights. We even have, there was a mayor in New Jersey, it was Belleville, New Jersey, who was very vocal about it. He said he's witnessed it and he wants answers. And then what happened, we got to talk about this, the Trump administration. Everyone was hoping we were going to get some new information. And they just said, nope, those are just FAA-approved aircraft and nothing to see here. So that was really upsetting.
Objectively worse.
Yeah.
I did not think it was possible to get worse from the last administration. And this is objectively worse. The Biden administration was at least sort of alluding to the fact that they didn't understand something here.
Yeah.
And the Trump administration is just going with a straight gaslighting option.
Yeah.
Where they're just saying...
It's unfortunate.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we even had officials from the FBI telling Congress they don't know what they are.
Yeah. I mean, we could try and debunk the lie for 30 seconds because that's all it would take. It was debunked as it was happening when two F-16s had to intercept an
That's right.
That was moving a plane down.
So, yeah, that was, I think, less than 2 hours after they said those were all FAA-compliant drones and nothing to worry about. Then they had to scramble F-16s because drones were getting in the way of government airplanes. So,
right.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was basically as it was happening. It's so bad. And this is a real bummer because Trump, prior to getting elected, said that he was going to give away some UAP information, that he was going to become more transparent about that. And this looks like same old story. I mean, he had 4 years to do it before and he didn't do it. Here we are, week 1, 8 days in.
No one wants to be the disclosure president.
I wonder if they can. I wonder if they're allowed to be.
Yeah.
And Ross Kohlhart has reported that some sources that he had talked to said that Trump was scared they were going to kill him if he talked about UFOs. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't want to give him a pass. I mean, somebody's got to take the plunge. You know, Biden should have done it, and we didn't pull any punches with him. Hey, you're in the hot seat now. And then prior to getting into office, he says, okay, something very strange is going on with the drones, and I think it's shameful that they're not telling you. And he wouldn't comment on whether he'd been briefed about it or not. And of course he's been briefed. He's the incoming commander-in-chief.
Yeah.
And when they said, this is something the FAA was testing, he was supposed to go to his golf club at Bedminster the week before. And he wasn't able to because there was a security concern about these drones. So if that's something the FAA is flying around, I'd be pretty pissed.
Yeah.
But of course it's not that. And when they tell the incoming commander-in-chief that he can't go to his golf club for the weekend, they don't tell him, we can't tell you why. He's already the incoming commander-in-chief. He's going to get a briefing on why he can't go into his golf club. So he knows. He didn't have to turn to Susie and go, hey, Susie, find out about these drones. Very weird, huh?
Susie. Oh, yeah. Is that his chief of staff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When he was signing all the executive orders, he turned to her.
Right.
They were asking about drones. He's like, I just got here. What are you talking about? You said one day into the administration.
Yeah.
And hey, we gave him a whole week. And then this is didn't say anything. And this is what we got. We just got a very lazy gaslight.
Yeah, it's a bummer. But the good news is these UAPs are relentless. They're not going anywhere. They seem to be growing in number, and they really can't be ignored. So something's got to break.
Yeah, like you said, that mayor from Belleville, Michael Melham, I mean, he's showing fantastic leadership during these times. Yeah. As far as we know, this is the biggest UFO event ever. So anyone involved right now is being tested. It was very interesting what Jake Barber said, that he said at the end of his interview with Ross Coulthart, Ross asked him, how do we know whether these things are good or bad? And he said, know them by their fruits, which is a Bible verse from Matthew.
Oh.
Know them by their fruits. And I really like that. It's sort of the conclusion I came to after dealing with my own experience, which was, okay, I don't really know whether the whole phenomenon is good or bad. I don't know whether it has to be. I think these are individual entities. And the question is, which one is which? And prior to all this, the Vatican comes out with these statements on discernment.
Oh, recently?
Yeah.
Oh.
Not that long ago, last year.
Oh, okay.
They came out with all these statements on discernment that the UFO community, I know, was really looking forward to and hoping it would give them more information about what the Vatican knew. But it was really about how to tell whether a miracle is real or not.
Oh, okay.
Which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
I think they did tell us a little bit more about what they know.
How so? Just by bringing it up?
Yeah, just by bringing it up and by focusing on that. It's just like intelligence. Yeah, you have to look at what they're looking at.
Right.
Or it's what they're not saying, not what they're saying, because that's BS.
Right.
And with these UFO and mystery drones, they're trying the same tactics. And on these UAP mystery drones, and their method has been the same as UFO Rule 1, which is to focus on the misidentifieds. Just keep saying misidentifieds.
Right.
If 60% of them are misidentified, just keep saying that's it.
Right.
And if they can do that enough, and we know there's misidentifications, that's easy to validate. And then it discredits the whole thing. Right. And then you get people to point at something. You actually fly stuff up there and you go, look, they were talking about a hobby drone.
Right. That's what happened. That's all the noise started because people were flying drones to investigate the drones.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why we constructed the timeline the way we did, based on local news sources. Those are validated in some way. It's not just people shooting from the cuff. And then the law enforcement statements are all documented.
So looking forward, what do we do? We're listening to how everyone responds.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. And we should know them by their fruits. We should look at people who are responding to this giant event and look at what they're saying and see if it is valid or if they're authentic. I mean, we have people like Mellon showing leadership, and we have the Trump administration, not right now. Hopefully they change course on that. We have some other people throwing little hissy fits on social media and freaking out on reality TV.
Just trying to discredit it?
No, I think they're just trying to draw attention to themselves. They know that there's a lot of attention on the topic right now, and so they're just trying to draw attention to themselves.
Right.
And what we should be doing is drawing attention to the event. And, as people who are aware of what UAP characteristics are, we can just be reminding people, look, these things are UAP. Go look at the prophet Yahweh. It's not the first time. It's about time that we took these things seriously, and it's time that the government talked to us. And Jake Barber is making some pretty wild allegations or substantiating with some sort of hearsay that he heard that something that John Stewart, a ufologist who we've mentioned before, a source had told John Stewart that there was a firefight in Nevada between Joint Special Operations Command troops and a defense contractor unit from Lockheed Martin.
Yeah.
And Jake said he heard that that was true. If that's true, that's a really big deal on so many levels.
And so he's saying that was a conflict that was related to a recovery?
Correct. The story as it goes, still alleged. I have to be really careful on this one.
Yeah.
So it is alleged, and basically a Joint Special Operations Command Team, which is JSOC, it's usually Special Forces or Rangers or SEALs or some of the pararescue, and they go out there to do a crash retrieval. And they said a UFO crashed, and they went out there to go pick it up. And they go out there, and they find another unit there. So they assume it's hostile, and they engage. And a couple of the JSOC soldiers were said to have been killed. Wow. And, yeah, if that happened on American soil, no less, too. And it'd be pretty wild. Mm-hmm. Because, for one, the military isn't even supposed to be doing things on American soil. And for two, Lockheed Martin isn't allowed to be shooting at American military. So this relationship gets really complex and really gray. But allegedly, it was an alien reproduction vehicle, ARV, which was a UFO that they had reverse engineered, that Lockheed Martin had reverse engineered and had crashed. And they went out there to go pick it up.
Okay.
So they were saying it was their property, and they were there to go pick it up, and that the military came and attacked them. If the story is true, and if it's true as it's told, prior to Jake Barber and his team saying that they heard that this was true, the only evidence had been an email to Jon Stewart.
Okay.
So this is something that Congress needs to look into right away. Because this is one of those things that I say we really need to clear up. It's got nothing to do with UFOs. These types of shenanigans are unconstitutional, illegal, and if you're getting soldiers killed, it takes this to another level.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, that's pretty serious. That's why we looked into it.
Yeah, we took a look around and we checked out the casualties in 2004, and we looked for any red flags. Didn't really see any, but that wouldn't be too surprising because it's pretty easy to cover up or just say it was an accidental death when it comes to special operations troops.
Yeah.
But there were places where you could cover up. It was mostly in those areas, in special forces, training accidents, those sorts of things. So if you were doing this sort of investigation in Congress, that's where you'd want to look.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and just 2004, unrelated, but maybe related, is a really significant year because that always sticks in my head because that was the year that those Hornet pilots recorded the Tic Tac video.
Yeah, good catch. That was a very active year for UAP too.
I mean, that is just that was a huge event. That turned things around big time. I know for me personally, once that Tic Tac video came out, you know, it really grabbed me when it came to UAPs. So maybe there was just a lot of movement. There was a lot of activity regarding UAPs in 2004.
Yeah, it looks like it. And this may have gotten a couple people killed. And that's hard to cover up because soldiers have families. So you can tell, a family of a special forces troop. You can say, hey, your son or daughter died in accidental death, or they can say they died in a way that we can't tell you, and that's the more honest way to do it. But either way,
it's just that we've talked about it before, and there's been so much speculation for decades now that there are private military contractors that are running the show. That's bad for the country.
Right. It looks like once again they have an outsized interest in this technology. And that there's a controlling interest. And that's what we're seeing right now when we talk about people and their reaction and our discernment and know them by their fruits. I'm seeing a lot of people lining up right now looking for money and power all around the UFO field, right? We're seeing people position themselves and trying to get the public to position themselves as the right person to be that guy, right? That is in charge of UFO tech, UFO information. And then there's also a big push for money because they're dying to tell investors to forget about cars. You want to invest in UFOs. That's where the money is, big boy. I mean, it's endless, the amount of things that we're talking about. Medical technology, lots of different things, weapons.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of people line up to be the owners of all that. And then we have these NHI dropping these things off. And I would again say that they are given to us. Even the NASA and internal UFO gatekeeper people are calling them donations.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And what's the intended effect of the donation, though? Is it intended to get us to build technology that eventually destroys ourselves? Or is the intended effect to get us to look at technology in a different way and build cleaner and better, easier ways of living?
Right. Well, we may find out soon enough because the activity right now, as we speak, is growing. So, I mean, I just can't stress that enough. We are living in an extraordinary time right now.
We're calling this wave, we're saying began November 18th. And it's going now on February 2nd.
Yeah.
So
you're still here.
They're still here. This has never happened before. And now we're seeing an increase in contact. It really looks like we are working through those stages of ridicule, attack, inevitability.
Right. If there's one absolute, is that through all this, 14 Winds will continue the research, and we will be there.
That's right. And even in the face of the apocalypse, we will be looking for data.
Man, I'm looking at the apocalypse face to face every day.
Yeah, that's right.
Doesn't faze me.
You're still just looking for angles, baby.
Yeah.
So next time we'll continue our discussion of the occult, and we'll actually wrap that up. And I think I have some insights, and I want to share the final insights from our AI analysis. And then I'm sure we will have a lot to talk about UFOs again.
Great. Sounds good. Well, we'd just like to thank our listeners for I guess you could say tuning in. But just thanks for the discussion, Ram. It's always good talking to you.
It's good talking to you, Bones.
All right, everyone. Take care of yourself.